Well, hello again. Welcome to another episode of Ottawa Exposed with David Krayden. I'm the senior parliamentary columnist for the Western Standard, and I'm really happy to be here again this week. We got lots to discuss, believe me. Well, I hope you all had a Merry Christmas. I want to start off the broadcast by saying I hope you spent time with friends and family. You got recharged, because we're in for a big 2023. I think we can all agree to that. There's possibility of an election. We'll get to that later. But I want to open up with some of the worst moments of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in 2022. You know, he's never as predictable as you think. When he's done the worst, he always goes that one step further and goes and makes you sick. And that's exactly what Trudeau did in 2022. And I wrote a column that this week that encapsulated, I think, some of the worst moments. There's so many, but they weren't just moments that were funny or ridiculous. They are also moments that were terrible policy. And of course, he began the year with terrible policy. When the Freedom Convoy came to Ottawa, what was Justin Trudeau's reaction? Well, he fled the city. And I said jokingly at the time, he probably watched the entire Matrix series. But it could have been true, because we learned recently that he loves that kind of film and television. And his favorite television show is something called The Boys, which is about a bunch of vigilantes, should be anathema to Justin Trudeau, going after corrupt superheroes. Now, I've never seen it, have no plans to, but it shows you where the man's mind was. And it probably was there in February, where he disappeared, talked about having another bout of COVID, and came back and refused to meet with any of the truckers, any of the protesters who were in Ottawa peacefully protesting against vaccine mandates. And then he invokes the Emergencies Act on February 14th. Now, good grief, that was Valentine's Day. And of course, that's why I always remember the day that he invoked the Emergencies Act. It was Valentine's Day. That was an act of really sick symbolism. Really sick symbolism. But of course, that's what Trudeau is all about. And he came down hard on these protesters. And of course, we learned recently in this year-end interview that he had no other reason to come down so hard on these protesters, but because they disagreed with him. It had nothing to do with public safety. They disagreed with his policies on COVID-19, his vax policies. They had a right to disagree. But Trudeau said, no, they cannot be out there spreading this misinformation. And he went even further and called them Nazis and misogynists and racists, and basically smeared a whole bunch of blue-collar workers who were out there trying to make a statement. But that was definitely his worst moment of 2022. I want to get to a more comical moment, but of course, everything Trudeau does comically has tragic consequences. And that's exactly what happened. He was in London for the Queen's funeral, Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. It was a state funeral. Trudeau was obviously there representing Canada. She was our queen. She had died after 60 years on the throne. She had just celebrated her Diamond Jubilee. And Trudeau was in London. And on the eve of the funeral, what does Justin Trudeau do? Well, what do you expect a narcissistic individual like Trudeau do? Well, we learned he was not only a gifted blackface performer who had been doing that sort of thing for years, but he was also a third-rate piano bar singer. And he's sitting around the piano looking a little bit worse for wear. We don't know if he was drinking or not. It's hard to tell with Justin Trudeau, because he does things sober that a lot of people wouldn't think of doing it unless they were drinking. But here he is on the piano, and one of his friends is tinkling the ivories, and he's singing Bohemian Rhapsody by the 1970s band Queen. Now, there seems to be an awful correlation here between singing a song from a band named Queen and going to the Queen's funeral the next day. I don't know if Justin Trudeau was trying to read something into this or portray something. Who knows what kind of contrivances this man uses or even thinks of, because he didn't formally taped this this rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody. Somebody at the hotel had an iPhone and recorded it, put it on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook the following day, and it was all over the world. And once again, Justin Trudeau was disappointing us, as he always seems to do. So this was, it reminded me of his antics in India when he was over there every day, dressed in traditional Indian clothing, with his whole family dressed up that way, standing in front of the camera, preening for these photo ops. And Justin Trudeau, it's always about Justin Trudeau. He had to make the Queen's funeral about himself. Even if it's about how ridiculous Justin Trudeau is, he just needs to be the center, the focus of the news. And this was just an incredibly embarrassing event for Canada. But I want to move on to a couple of other things. And a lot of ridiculous things happened at the G20 conference in Bali. And Trudeau, of course, was at the center of these as well. Every time he leaves the country, he seems to get into trouble. As one of my colleagues at the Western Standard quipped, maybe somebody should take away his passport for a while so he can just embarrass Canada inside Canada and not go overseas and advertise it. But he was at the G20 summit. He was asked about the extermination of the Uyghurs in China. Now, these are Muslim people within China that the Chinese Communist government are killing, putting in concentration camps, just like Hitler did, and killing them through overwork, exhaustion, starvation, or by other means. We're not exactly sure how many are dying and how exactly they are dying, but we know this is an extermination policy, much like Hitler had against the Jews. Now, would Justin Trudeau label this a genocide? And in one of his classic Trudeau-esque moments, he stumbled and stammered and tried to suggest that he's not somebody who can make that judgment call. He's not qualified to say whether it's a genocide. Well, when was Justin Trudeau ever unqualified in his own mind to make a judgment call about anybody? He routinely smears Canadians as racist and misogynistic, sometimes Nazi-like if they don't agree with him. Yet he can't label what's going on in China as a genocide. Why? Because he's afraid of the Chinese. This pops up increasingly in his dialogue with the Chinese. He's always very careful about criticizing the Chinese. So this was followed by an actual argument, except it was quite one-sided, with Chinese dictator Xi Jinping. Now, Xi obviously was upset that Trudeau was leaking some of his private conversations with the Chinese dictator to the Canadian media. And Xi was quite upset about this, and he dressed down Trudeau publicly with the cameras are on. And it was very embarrassing. And Trudeau just sort of sat there or stood there smiling, taking this dressing down, this uprating from this Chinese dictator. And then he sort of turned and walked into the men's room. It was a classic scene, leaving his chief of staff there to just sort of watch with her mouth hanging open. I don't know if Trudeau went into the men's room to relieve himself, to throw up, or to just disappear. But clearly he was not comfortable standing there any longer. So that was the third incident. The fourth I named in the column was Trudeau's refusal to sell liquid natural gas to Germany. Now, this happened last August. Germany asked Canada, we're going to need LNG, liquid natural gas, because we can't get enough oil out of Russia due to the war with Ukraine. So what does Trudeau say? No, there's no business case for it. Now, this is a monumental failure of judgment, but the sort of thing we expect from Justin Trudeau. This is the man who routinely says that we need green energy, even though it's not available in any sort of quantity to satisfy the industrial needs of a modern society. This is the man who says we don't need pipelines, except if they benefit him politically. So he decides, no, we're not going to sell natural gas to the Germans. And there's no business case for it. Well, actually, there's probably billions of dollars of a business case there. But Trudeau is so incredibly dense in terms of economics. This is a man who styles himself as an economist, although he clearly knows very little about even the basics. He refuses to sell the gas. So what does Germany do? They go elsewhere. They go to Mexico, and they put a terminal on the ocean so they can transport LNG to Germany. They can actually start importing gas. Could have done it from Canada. We have vast supplies of natural gas that we could have sent to Germany, and we could have been making a lot of money, a ton of cash on this. But Trudeau, once again, decided it was his way, not the right way. So that was the fourth ridiculous thing he did that year. The fifth incident that I mentioned in the column, I think, is quite tragic, because at the emergencies inquiry investigation, he was on the stand on the last day, and he was there for about 8 hours, and he read his talking points when the government lawyers were there. He did his best to look like he was unshakable, but he lied. Or he lied or he forgot. Because he was asked, why did you call the protesters, the people who came to Ottawa as part of the Freedom Convoy? Why did you call people who disagree with your vaccine policy names? And Trudeau said, I never called them names. And he said that with the camera rolling. This was recorded, and I broadcast it to the world as far and wide as I could. He, of course, did call the Freedom Convoy people names. He did call the unvaccinated names. He started out by calling the whole Freedom Convoy like a fringe movement, a very dangerous extremist movement. He suggested they were violent. He suggested they wanted to take over the government, and of course, he called the unvaccinated names. He called them racist and misogynistic. And we have that, of course, on tape in both languages. He said it in English, and he said it in a French broadcast as well. So that is what Justin Trudeau did in 2022. I would really be hard-pressed to find some triumphant moments for Justin Trudeau in 2022. It was not a happy year for Justin Trudeau, just as it was not a happy year for Canadians who have suffered from his carbon tax, who have suffered from his high gas prices, who have suffered from inflation, and who are suffering increasingly from his social reach. He wants censorship. He wants to take over social media. He wants to suppress the new media in this country as much as he wants to enrich and subsidize the mainstream legacy media. And this is very dangerous. So it's not been a good year for Canadians under Justin Trudeau. But I'll tell you, it's been a very good year for Albertans under Danielle Smith. And I touched on this in my second column of the week. I think Danielle Smith has done one hell of a good job leading Alberta, because there was a bit of a hangover after Jason Kenney retired from politics. A lot of us who knew Jason Kenney, and I'm one of them, I thought he was going to do a lot better, especially during the pandemic. But he became so authoritarian, putting people in jail, locking down the economy, that he disappointed a lot of principled conservatives. They're coming back to the United Conservative Party under Danielle Smith because she's serious. She's taking this very seriously. She ran on a very conservative agenda. She ran under the Alberta Sovereignty Act, and that's the first order of business she had when she became premier. She passed the Alberta Sovereignty Act. She means business with Ottawa. She means to strike out as a province, and as she's become a beacon and a symbol of provincial autonomy, provincial rights by doing this. And she's not asking for anything Quebec already didn't get over decades, beginning with the Quiet Revolution and through those decades where Quebec threatened to separate. The federal government retroceded a lot of rights it had taken away from Quebec and gave them back during this period. Now, Alberta needs to do the same thing, and Danielle Smith is doing that. She's demanding that Alberta have the rights the Constitution already gives it. And believe me, if you think the Alberta Sovereignty Act is radical, it was Pierre Trudeau, actually, who wrote the notwithstanding clause into the Constitution so provinces could opt out of federal legislation they don't like. So there's nothing new or radical about the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Quebec's been doing it for years. It's already really in the Constitution as part of the notwithstanding clause, which is there, which is which has been used by Quebec in the past, as they always do. They're not afraid to use it. Alberta has those rights already. And Danielle Smith is simply standing up for what she needs to stand up for. And I call her the Margaret Thatcher of Alberta because she's come under tremendous pressure from interest groups, the mainstream media, the opposition NDP, and people who just don't like her. They don't like her because she means what she says, and she says what she means. She's following through. She has not thrown the unvaxxed to the wind. She has not come in and said, I didn't mean what I said when I ran for the leadership of the UCP. She says, I mean when I said I'm going to follow through in this, and Alberta is going to prosper. Now, she's slightly behind in the polls to Rachel Notley's NDP in Alberta, but you watch that change. The latest poll had 25% undecided. Now, that means that's probably 25% largely conservative voters who were fed up with Jason Kenney and said, I'm not going to vote for him again. But they're looking at Danielle Smith and saying, hey, here's a principled conservative who means what she says. And she's going to go through with and do what she promised as someone who ran in a leadership race. You know, Richard Nixon, the former U.S. president, the late Richard Nixon, used to say, you run to the right in primaries when you're running for party leadership, and you run to the center in a national election. Danielle Smith is saying you run for the truth. You run for what's right, whether you're running for the leadership of a party or whether you're running for premier of a province. So expect Danielle Smith to stay firm on these issues. She's not going to cave to the national media that want her out of politics. They don't like her because she's not part of the status quo. And she is challenging the pusillanimous Justin Trudeau, and she's going to win that fight. Because I tell you, she's got the guts, she's got the moxie, she's got the intelligence to do it, and Justin Trudeau doesn't. The irony of this, of course, is that while his father, Pierre Trudeau, spent his entire political career trying to build up a very central, strong government that would rule the provinces like fiefdoms, Justin Trudeau, by being so weak, he's allowing the provinces to maintain and really, for the first time, reify their provincial autonomy, which they already have in law. So I want to turn to my third column of the week, which was all about Pierre Poilevre and the Conservatives. Now, there's all kinds of talk, as I mentioned at the offset of this broadcast, about a provincial or a federal election occurring in 2023. Now, that's entirely possible. Justin Trudeau has told his caucus, get ready for an election in the spring of 2023. Now, why would he do that? Well, because he's up in the polls, comparatively, relatively speaking, and he knows the potential for a huge economic breakdown, not just a recession, but a possible depression, is entirely possible in the latter part of 2023. So he wants to get reelected. He's also looking at the collapse of the NDP, the federal NDP under Jagmeet Singh. Because in a recent by-election in Mississauga, the NDP vote collapsed to the point of it being a tertiary, not even a third party, a tertiary party, fighting for the scraps with the other parties at that end of the spectrum. And Trudeau senses that his deal with the devil, his pact with Jagmeet Singh, is going to pay off by NDP voters going to vote for Liberal. Because if Trudeau can deliver what Jagmeet Singh is promising, why bother? Vote for the socialist Liberal candidate, namely Justin Trudeau. So he's banking on that. But he's not banking on Canadians looking around and saying, am I better off than I was 4 years ago? Now, Ronald Reagan, one of my political heroes, in his debate with Jimmy Carter, just prior to the 1980 presidential election, then Governor Ronald Reagan turned to the audience and asked, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Speaking about the 4 years of Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, Democrat Jimmy Carter. And of course, Americans resoundingly said no, they weren't better off. Pierre Poilievre needs to enunciate that same question to Canadians. Are you better off now than you were under the last 4 years of Justin Trudeau? Under the last 2 years of Justin Trudeau? Are you better off? Or are you paying more for everything? And is Justin Trudeau reaching his hand into every area of society? Is he threatening censorship? Is he taking away your guns to the point of this being a gun-free society with no right to self-defense? Is that what Justin Trudeau is up to? And I think the question can be answered with no. I'm not better off than I was 4 years ago. I'm not better off than I was 2 years ago. And that question is going to haunt Justin Trudeau in the next federal election. You know what else Pierre Poilievre needs to do? And I hope he watches this broadcast. Again, I refer to Ronald Reagan, who presented a positive, principled conservatism. He talked about America as a shining city on the hill. He talked about free enterprise as something that liberates people, liberates their talents, liberates their ability to make money without the state doling it out. He said conservatism was a positive place to be. It was a great place to be because it was all about freedom, individual freedom, not mandates, not the government telling you what you can watch on the internet, not the government coming to your house and confiscating your weapons, not the government trying to take over your life and trying to tell you how to run your life. Ronald Reagan was all about individual freedom, and that's what Pierre Poilievre needs to express in this next election. Positive conservatism. He cannot just expect to win by bashing Justin Trudeau. As tempting as that is, and as often as I do that, he cannot win the election simply by doing that. He has to present the same positive policies that he presented when he ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada this year. And why were those crowds there? Why did he attract so many people who were youthful, blue-collar workers, women, minorities, new Canadians? Why were they attracted to Pierre Poilievre? Because he talked about individual freedom. And he said, Canada needs to be the home of freedom. Canada needs to be a place where businesses can operate without huge regulations, where taxes can be cut, and where the money can be made by individual Canadians and not by the state. Because the state doesn't make money. It takes money away from us. And that's what Pierre Poilievre talked about while he was running for leadership. And that's what Pierre Poilievre needs to talk about again in the next election, if we have one in 2023. And I personally think it's a good bet we are going to have one. And we have to watch very carefully what the Liberals try to do to the Conservative Party. They will try to portray Pierre Poilievre as extreme, as dangerous. Those are the words they love, extreme and dangerous. But Poilievre needs to fight back in a positive way. And I want to hear him talk about selling off the CBC again. He needs to talk about that because that's not an extremist position. It's a normal position. Most Canadians want to see the CBC support itself and get out of its parents' bedroom and go to work, for goodness sake. Stop accepting 100% subsidy from the state. And we need to cut the subsidies to other media off too under a conservative government. And if they don't do that, they're making a terrible, terrible mistake. And that leads me to my pitch at the end of this broadcast, is that support the new media, and the Western Standard is the new media. We do not accept a cent, not 1 cent of government subsidy, not a cent from this federal government, from this Trudeau government. Because when you accept money from the government, you're going to start talking their party line. You're going to allow yourself to be used by the government because you want that money to continue to be pumped in to your media outlet. We need a return to free expression, free speech, and free media without government interference. And if Poilievre can deliver that, we need to support Poilievre in the next election because we need a change. We need a change from Justin Trudeau. We need somebody who's talking a very different line. And that's why. So subscribe today. If you see this broadcast, read my column. I'm in there every day with a lot of other fantastic writers who are writing the news or writing opinion. So go to www.westernstandard.news and subscribe today. Make it a New Year's gift to yourself or a New Year's gift to your family. or your friends, because new media is saving this country from mainstream media that is tired, that is old, that is quite in a state of complete inertia. So I want to say thank you for listening again today. And I want to tell you, tune in next week because I'm going to be continuing to expose what's going on here in Ottawa. I want you all to have a happy New Year's Eve and a safe and happy New Year's Eve. And we're going to bring in the new year and hope for change in 2023. But the only one who can bring that change is you. So get out and vote in 2023. Support your candidates. Support the principles you believe in, because it starts with you at home, you and your family. So goodbye for now, and God bless you all and bless this year that was 2022, but we can do much better in 2023.